Welcome to a sleepy journey. But not a boring one. Tonight, we'll turn the pages of the tumultuous history of the Ashkenazi Jews, from their earliest exiles to the deeply ingrained memories of resistance flowing through their veins. A soft mist clings to the narrow alleys of Prague's old town. You walk slowly, the cobblestones uneven beneath your shoes, their worn edges holding stories centuries old. A cat slips by like a ghost. Candlelight flickers through a stained-glass window, high up in a crooked building. And there, pacing silently under a sliver of moon, is a man in a heavy black coat, his beard tucked into his collar, his eyes flicking between shadows that don't move. You don't know his name yet. But the city does. They call him the Maharal, Rabbi Loew ben Bezalel, and tonight, like most nights, he cannot sleep. You follow at a respectful distance. His steps are slow, almost meditative, but they double back, pause, change pace, then resume. It's not insomnia. It's calculation. You can feel it, his mind racing behind that calm, contemplative face. He's not afraid of what lurks in the dark. No. He's afraid of what he has locked away from the dark. Some say he's a magician. Others say he's the last of the true sages. A few whisper he commands an unstoppable being made of clay. And that it's upstairs. Watching, the weight of knowledge is heavy, they say, but for this man, it's heavier than usual. His teachings echo across Europe, sure, but so do rumors. Accusations. Gratitude. Fear. And tonight, he carries all of them with him through the streets, while the rest of the city dreams. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Drop your location in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trail the rabbi back to his study. It's not large. The furniture is functional, the desk slightly uneven. A candle stutters on a brass plate. He doesn't light a second one. One is enough. A stack of papers lies open, filled with Hebrew letters so dense they look like spiderwebs. You glance over his shoulder. Some are Talmudic commentaries. Others, definitely not. There's geometry there. Diagrams. Names of angels. A few symbols you're not entirely sure belong on paper. He sits. Doesn't acknowledge you. That's okay. You're just a presence, a silent guest in his haunted midnight. You won't disturb him. There's a journal open beside the candle. The ink is fresh. You lean closer. A single line sits at the top of the page, underlined once. What if it wakes without me? That's the first real chill that slides down your spine. You've probably heard of the Golem, the mythic protector made of earth, brought to life through mystical rituals and divine words placed behind its teeth or on its brow. Most stories end with the Golem saving the Jews of Prague from violent persecution, smashing the unjust, shielding the weak. And then, as if on cue, it gets put back to sleep in the attic of the Altneuskul synagogue. Just in case it's needed again, but that's the official bedtime version. Tonight, you're going to hear something else, because here's a reality check. If you were a rabbi in 16th century Bohemia, balancing theology, politics, mysticism, and violent anti-Semitism, you probably wouldn't survive this either. But the Maharal did. Mostly. And something about that balance still haunts this night. Still unsettles the candle's flame. Now, a mainstream fact for grounding, Rabbi Loew ben Bezalel was a real historical figure, born around 1525 in what's now the Czech Republic. He's widely celebrated as a brilliant Talmudist, philosopher, and mathematician. His writings shaped Jewish education for generations, but here's the quirky part, no contemporary records actually mention him creating a golem. The earliest written golem legends connected to him only appeared long after his death. So why is he forever linked to a creature of clay? Historians still argue whether the entire golem tale was retrofitted onto his biography, an allegory of Jewish survival slapped onto the shoulders of a respected name. But here's the more unnerving possibility, maybe he did build something. Maybe the myth stuck because some people saw it. He rises suddenly, snuffing the candle. The room plunges into near darkness, save for the halo of moonlight stretching through the narrow window. You hear a creak above. Not from the roof. From the attic. He tilts his head, not in fear, but in recognition. As if he expected that sound. As if something up there is moving exactly according to schedule. You notice he doesn't write anything else in the journal. He just closes it slowly and locks it shut with a tiny iron clasp. Then he stands, breathes in deeply, and walks to the far corner of the room. There's a ladder. Not quite hidden, but not obvious either. You hadn't noticed it until now. He places his hand on the bottom rung and pauses, and that's when you feel it, like someone behind you is holding their breath. Or maybe something above you just exhaled. You want to follow. Of course you do. Curiosity is irresistible. But something inside you, perhaps even something inherited from generations of cautious ancestors, whispers, "Not tonight." The rabbi climbs the ladder. 1 step. Then 2. The wood groans, but not from his weight. Then he vanishes through the trapdoor. You stand in the stillness he leaves behind, wondering what a man of his wisdom is so afraid of. And whether you should be afraid too. The door above clicks shut. You're alone now, but the room hums with a strange tension, like it's holding its breath in case the rabbi screams. He won't, of course. He built what's up there, but whether he controls it. That's another question. Your gaze shifts to the extinguished candle, still curling with a thread of smoke. A quiet moment passes, and then the sounds return. Faint at first. Like shifting weight. Not a scurry. Not rodents. Something slower. More deliberate. Something that knows it's being listened to, and doesn't care. You take a careful seat in the rabbi's chair, unsure if you're allowed to. The wood is worn smooth, like it's held decades of late-night wait. You place your palm on the desk, and your fingers brush something strange. A groove. A shallow track, almost invisible, but repeated so many times it's left a mark. Someone has paced in here, night after night, hand trailing this very edge, worrying a path into the oak. A sigh escapes you. If he's not sleeping, neither are you. There's a noise above. A dull scrape. Then another. And finally, silence. The kind that's heavier than sound. Let's talk about the golem, not the cute one from pop culture with sparkly eyes and a misunderstood heart. Not even the terrifying one your bub hinted at when she warned you about wandering too far from the synagogue. No, this one, his golem, was not a bedtime story. It was a problem-solving machine. A solution forged from desperation and divine syllables. A counterpunch to centuries of injustice, and upstairs, it might still be breathing. The Altnusko, Prague's oldest functioning synagogue, is where most say the golem rests. Up in the attic. No one's allowed there anymore. Not since the day the Maharal placed the final command on its forehead, Emet, truth. And then, when it was time to put it down, he erased the first letter, leaving Met, dead. Now here's the historical hook. The Maharal was an actual community leader during a terrifying period for Jews in Bohemia. Pogroms, blood libel accusations, forced conversions, they weren't distant threats. They were regular visitors. And when the authorities refused to intervene, who could the people turn to? That's right. The man who never slept, the Golem legend, as told in its earliest full form, not until the 19th century, claims he shaped it from clay taken from the Vltava River. Sculpted it with his own hands. Then, alongside a trusted student, walked around it 7 times while reciting a permutation of the Shem HaMepharash, the ineffable name of God. And the creature opened its eyes. The rabbis disagree, of course. Always, historians still argue whether the Maharal's name was retroactively tied to the legend because of his fame, or if he truly did experiment with mystical creation. Some point out inconsistencies. Others quietly admit they've never gone into the attic. Here's a weird tidbit. In the 18th century, Emperor Joseph II's soldiers tried to access the attic space during a state inspection of the synagogue. The shamash, caretaker, reportedly fainted when they suggested opening the door. Later, no report of what they found, if anything, was filed. Convenient, no, back in the study, the candle's smoke has vanished, and the scent of wax is fading. The rabbi still hasn't returned. You glance again at the ladder. It's simple. Wood, splintered, almost rickety. It doesn't look like the gateway to a legend. But you're starting to understand, nothing about the Maharal's world makes sense under light. It's a nighttime logic, full of symbolism, patterns, coded fear, that creak again. This time from behind the wall, not the ceiling. Your skin tightens, and now a memory rises unbidden, an odd tale told by an elderly scholar in Krakow, who claimed the golem wasn't just a protector, but a kind of spiritual battery. That it absorbed danger like a sponge, and that's why it had to be shut down. It started holding too much. Rage. Grief. Vengeance. And when it overflowed, the rabbi had no choice, not to destroy it, to hide it, but why would he visit it still? Why keep going up there night after night if it's inactive? The answer, of course, is terrifyingly simple, because it might not be, because what he built to protect his people may have grown beyond him, grown curious, restless, even thoughtful. What if it listens now? Learns? Waits. Another historical note, while we catch our breath, the Maharal was not an isolated mystic. He was deeply involved in the philosophical and scientific discourse of his time. He corresponded with Tycho Brahe, the astronomer, and reportedly had access to imperial courts. He wasn't just a man of magic, he was a man of logic, which makes the golem feel less like fantasy, and more like design. Downstairs, you hear the trapdoor open again. Footsteps on the ladder. Deliberate. Slow. You step back from the chair, the rabbi appears, eyes weary, face unreadable. He closes the trapdoor gently and returns to the candle. Lights it with practiced ease. Says nothing, but his hand, resting for a moment on the desk, trembles. You want to ask what he saw. You won't. You already know the answer, or at least part of it. The golem is still up there. Still real, in some form, and the rabbi's nights are still full of conversations with a creature that shouldn't have a voice. But maybe does. He opens his journal again. This time, he writes 4 words, it is still listening. You don't ask what he means. You don't have to, instead, you sit quietly again as he writes in silence. The quill scratching in rhythm with his thoughts. The candle throws long shadows behind him, stretching up the wall like they're trying to escape the page. Your mind drifts back before the golem, before Prague, before the late-night pacing. Who was this man before he wore the weight of an entire community? What formed the Maharal? So you rewind the clock, you're no longer in Prague. You're in Worms, a city in the Holy Roman Empire, where the Rhine curls lazily and the air carries a constant whiff of damp parchment and coal. You're a child now, his child, in a sense, peering from behind wooden shutters as your father whispers Talmudic riddles by oil lamp light. The year? Around 1530. Give or take. Historical birth records back then were loose. People were more focused on surviving plagues and inquisitions than filing accurate paperwork. Historians still argue whether he was born in 1512 or 1525, but most settle on the latter, which still puts him squarely in a time of imperial chess games, Catholic anxiety, and very unfriendly neighbors. Your father is Bezalel, a rabbi and teacher himself, which means your life is shaped by scrolls and debate. The household isn't rich, but it's heavy with books, leather-bound, handwritten, and often in multiple languages. You don't just study Torah. You argue it. Dissect it. Sometimes even dream in it, and in those dreams, you begin asking questions that unsettle your teachers. Not heretical questions, just inconvenient ones. If God is perfect, why is the world so broken? If justice matters, why are Jews hunted and scapegoated like criminals? If angels exist, do they have opinions? these questions don't go away. They grow teeth, and while your peers prepare for the expected, marriage, yeshiva, trade, you find yourself lingering at the edges of mystical texts. The Zohar. The Sefer Yetzirah. Books your elders keep in high cabinets, with cracked bindings and warnings attached, you find them anyway. Curiosity is stronger than curfews. One night, you sneak into the study and crack open a commentary you're not supposed to have touched. It doesn't open like other books. There are diagrams, spirals, Hebrew letters arranged like maps rather than sentences. You trace a shape, and your fingertip tingles. This is not metaphor. This is machinery. Language as blueprint, that's when it starts. The dreams, you see letters floating in darkness, reshaping themselves into forms, hands, eyes, stars, unfamiliar creatures. You begin to suspect that creation isn't a one-time event in Genesis. It's an ongoing structure. Alive. Accessible. One morning, your father finds you asleep on the floor beside a half-burned candle and 3 open scrolls. He doesn't scold you. He just says, "Don't look too far ahead, Yehuda. Some doors don't unopen." But you do. Of course you do. Let's break for a historical fact here. By his teens, young Judah Loew was already considered a prodigy. He studied under the Maharal of Lublin and other leading minds of the era. His grasp of halacha was legendary, but what set him apart was his simultaneous love of logic and mystery, math and mysticism. Not many scholars could lecture on both Pythagorean geometry and Kabbalistic permutations of the divine name without getting side-eyed, and here's your quirky tidbit. Later in life, he'd be known to rearrange furniture before guests arrived, not for style, but to keep symbolic energy flowing correctly through the room. Feng Shui, 16th century Ashkenazi edition. Back in the dream, you're older now. Maybe 16. You've begun teaching others. But secretly, you've also begun building, not clay, not yet. But diagrams. Rituals. Experiments. You observe insects, plants, weather. You try to track the moment something becomes alive. Is it movement? Breath? Sound? Or the whisper of intention behind it? One afternoon, you visit the Jewish cemetery outside the city. Not to mourn, but to study. You've read somewhere that the space between letters on a tombstone says as much as the epitaph itself. You run your fingers along the grooves of old names, and that's when you notice something. A pattern. 4 stones in a row, names with identical first letters. Same spacing. Same year of death. Nothing recorded about a plague that year, but 4 bodies in 4 weeks, coincidence? Or trial and error, you begin a private notebook. Not the one for your Talmudic insights. The other one. The one with diagrams. And margins filled with notes like, try breathing over damp clay while reciting Psalm 33 in reverse. The kind of notes that would get you politely excommunicated or enthusiastically burned, depending on the mood of the magistrate. Historians debate how much he really dabbled in the practical side of Kabbalah. Some claim he was strictly philosophical, his mystical writings full of symbolism but not spellwork. Others point to strange entries in letters from his students, references to things that should not have been attempted again. Back in the quiet study in Prague, the rabbi finally looks up from his journal. He meets your eyes, not startled, but as if he expected you to remember. He nods once, slowly. He knows you've seen it, not the Golem. Not yet. But the origin. The child he once was, trying to answer questions that had no safe answers. He closes the journal, then, almost imperceptibly, he murmurs, "It wasn't always clay." You sit still, barely breathing. The rabbi's words, "It wasn't always clay," linger in the air like smoke that refuses to rise. You want to ask him what he means. But again, you don't. Because something in his voice tells you this is a confession meant only for silence. Instead, he reaches for a scroll tucked behind the candle. Its edges are frayed, the wax seal long since broken. He unrolls it halfway and taps a line with his finger. You lean in. The letters are ancient, older even than standard Aramaic commentary. They're shaped strangely, warped at the edges like they've been copied from a much older source. Some of them shimmer ever so faintly. But maybe that's just the candle, Sefer Yetzirah, he says, finally. His voice is calm, but underneath, there's heat. The book of formation. Not theory. Not metaphor. You blink. Wait. You use that too. He raises a finger gently. Not to shush, but to redirect. No, he says. It merely taught me how. The reason came later. He leans back, suddenly smaller than the towering intellect people imagine. He looks exhausted. Haunted, even. And that makes sense, because now, we're getting to the part that really kept the Maharal awake, not the how. The why. Let's pause here for our mainstream history dose. Sefer Yetzirah, or Book of Creation, is one of the oldest and most cryptic texts in Jewish mysticism. It describes how God formed the universe using the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet combined with 10 sphirot, mystical dimensions or emanations. It's short, dense, and wildly interpretive. Some rabbis read it as metaphor. Others as blueprint. The Maharal? Blueprint, and here's the quirky bit, some versions of Sefer Yetzirah include step-by-step instructions for forming life, not just spiritually, but physically. Including specific breath patterns and divine names that must be uttered at exact intervals, just in case you ever wanted to animate something during a quiet weekend. Back to the rabbi, who now looks like he's reliving something, not just remembering it. He sets the scroll aside and walks to a small wooden drawer tucked into the far corner of the room. He unlocks it with a key hidden behind a floor tile, yes, you saw that, and removes something wrapped in cloth. He unwraps it with delicate fingers. Inside is a fragment of parchment, just a sliver, as if torn from a larger whole. You lean closer, expecting more script. But instead, it's a drawing. A shape. Almost human. Almost, it has a mouth, but no eyes. Hands, but no fingers. It looks less like a man and more like the idea of a man, something halfway finished. He was my first, the rabbi murmurs. He didn't move. But he listened. You swallow. There's no sarcasm left in your bones now. The rabbi places the parchment on the desk, smooths the edge with one hand, then speaks, not to you, but perhaps to himself. I called him Shevach, he says. Praise. But I didn't mean it like a song. I meant, function. Praise in action. He pauses, then sighs. But even in silence, he began to change. You glance back at the shape. It's crude. Even childlike. But something about it feels observant, as though it knows you're watching. You try to look away and realize it takes effort. Historians, the rabbi continues, almost absently, will argue whether this was ever real. Whether my sleepless nights were a metaphor. A sign of genius or madness. But I know what I saw. He touches the sketch. And I know what I made next. Here's where the story turns. You probably expect the Golem, to come after all the theory. After careful construction and dramatic rituals. But no. The clay colossus wasn't his first attempt. It was his final one. Before that, there were intermediates. Practice forms. Models. One made of wax. Another of packed reeds and goat hide. None of them moved. Except in dreams, but one night, just one, he awoke to find Shevach's head tilted. Slightly. As if in reply, now, maybe he imagined it. Historians still argue whether the Maharal was influenced by the natural philosophers of the Renaissance, experimenting with automata and proto-mechanical devices. They also argue about whether what he called life was metaphorical animation or something darker. But the rabbi never called it an accident. It was a mirror, he says now. That's what frightened me. Not the thing. The reflection. He unwraps another cloth bundle. This one heavier. Inside is a shard of something solid, clay, you think. Dark. It looks like a piece of a jaw. I kept this, he murmurs. The second one. The failed one. Failed? You almost ask, but again, the silence is too thick, he doesn't elaborate. Just stares at the fragment. Then, as though remembering you're there, he sets it down and meets your eyes again. Do you know why I built the final one? He asks. You shake your head, because they came for a child. And suddenly you're cold again, as if someone cracked open the windows. But the windows are shut. Of course they are, he doesn't tell you more. Not yet. That story, that night, is coming. But for now, he returns the fragments to their drawer. Locks it again, and sits. You must understand, he says, softer now. It was never about vengeance. It was about interruption. About placing something unignorable between them and us. A pause. But even interruption must obey the limits of intention. He closes the Sefer Yetzirah. As he does, the candle flutters violently, then returns to calm. He looks tired. His eyes dark. But behind them, you see it, that same relentless logic, that childhood fire, now older but not dimmed, and you realize something strange. He's still building. The next morning, if you can call it morning in this endlessly twilight place, the rabbi is already awake. Or maybe he never slept. He's at the window. Hands clasped behind his back, watching the fog snake through the crooked lanes of Prague. You join him without a word. Below, the city stirs. Markets open slowly. Chimneys cough their first smoke. The sound of hooves echoes distantly over cobblestone. But none of it reaches the rabbi. His gaze is fixed beyond the square, beyond the day. His thoughts are still in that attic, or perhaps in another century altogether. I once dined with the emperor, he says quietly. You blink, he doesn't turn, doesn't explain. But you know the story is beginning now, Rudolph, he continues. Rudolph too. Strange man. Mad, some said. But he listened. The emperor. Yes, that Rudolph. King of Bohemia. Holy Roman Emperor, and full-time collector of oddities. Alchemy. Astrology. Artifacts. He relocated his imperial court to Prague in the late 1500s, turning the city into a haven for eccentric genius and esoteric inquiry. The perfect patron for a rabbi who read stars and rearranged the Hebrew alphabet in his sleep, Rudolph collected men the way others collect insects, the rabbi says with a faint smile. He wanted what was rare. And he thought me rare. You follow him to his desk, where he opens a small tin box and retrieves a folded letter. It's written on thick parchment with a wax seal, broken. The imperial crest, still visible. A summoning. Your wisdom is requested, the rabbi recites. Regarding unnatural accusations and unnatural possibilities, you're intrigued. Naturally, because this is the moment when the Maharal stops being a private scholar and becomes something more dangerous, a political actor. An unofficial negotiator. And maybe, just maybe, the last resort for people with no one else to turn to. The emperor had summoned him not for a debate, but for a decision. A Christian child had vanished. The whispers started immediately. The Jews took him, again. You tense. Because you've heard this tune before, the blood libel. The ugliest, most resilient myth, that Jews abducted and killed Christian children for ritual purposes. A baseless accusation that had triggered massacres across Europe for centuries. No evidence. No logic. Just fear and fury. And now, in Prague, it was returning, but this time, something was different. The emperor hesitated, maybe because he genuinely liked his Jewish mathematicians. Maybe because he'd grown tired of burning his tax base. Or maybe, and this is the version the rabbi never confirms, because he'd heard whispers. Whispers that the Jews of Prague had their own protector. A silent one. One that didn't answer to kings. Whatever the reason, he asked the Maharal to come. Quietly. To advise. You picture the meeting, a stone hall full of tapestries and nervous guards. The emperor perched on his throne like a bored cat, surrounded by alchemists, physicians, astrologers, and one rabbi in a dark robe who walks in carrying nothing but a walking stick and an unsettlingly calm expression. The rabbi chuckles suddenly. He offered me a glass of something green. I declined. He doesn't describe what they said in detail. Just this, I asked him one question. Do you want truth, or do you want quiet? The emperor blinked. Then chose truth, a bold move, considering what came next. Here's your mainstream historical anchor. While there's no firm documentation tying the Maharal to this specific child disappearance case, there are letters and community records from the period showing his active defense of the Jewish quarter during blood libel crises. He intervened with city authorities. He leveraged imperial connections. In some versions, he used sheer logic. In others, he used fear. Now the quirky part, according to legend, it was shortly after this event that the Golem began to appear. Not publicly, just footprints. Crushed cobblestone. A man swearing he saw a giant pass without a sound. And then, the child reappeared. Alive. Unharmed. Coincidence? Divine mercy? Or something else? Historians still argue whether the Golem story was invented to comfort a community living under threat, or if it was whispered as a quiet warning to the outside world. Back in the study, the rabbi unfolds another page from the same imperial box. It's a sketch. Not of the Golem, but of the city. Circles drawn around Jewish homes. A plan for containment, they were preparing, he says. In case the story went wrong. You realize something. The rabbi didn't create the Golem to save one child. He created it because he knew that next time, when the accusations returned, they wouldn't ask. They would act. He wasn't building a protector. He was building a deterrent, a walking argument against violence, and maybe, just maybe, a message for the emperor too. You look out the window again. The city seems smaller now. Quieter. But you feel the tension beneath the stones. As if they remember. As if every alley has a story it won't tell until midnight. The rabbi places the sketch back in the box and closes the lid gently, then he says something that chills you more than anything you've heard yet. I didn't build the Golem to protect the Jews, he says. I built it to remind the Christians we knew how. He doesn't smile. Doesn't blink, and you suddenly understand, power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it stands silently in an attic, waiting. You leave the rabbi's study and step into the morning, or what passes for it in Prague. The fog clings to the alleyways like old stories, the kind you can't shake no matter how many times you tell yourself they're not true. Children run down a side street. A dog barks. A cart rattles past carrying fish wrapped in yesterday's news. Life continues, as it always does, indifferent to what creaks above the Altnuskul's rafters, but the fear hasn't gone. It just wears more polite clothes. The rabbi meets you again later that evening, when the shadows grow long and the synagogue bell tolls once, like a held breath. He's pacing again. Not anxious, deliberate. His fingers trace a familiar groove in the railing as you trail behind him through the winding alleys of the Jewish quarter. He speaks without turning. You know what frightens me most? You wait, it's not that the Golem might disobey me, he says. It's that it might obey me perfectly. The weight of that settles on your chest like wet wool. He leads you toward the edge of the ghetto, past the stalls closing for the day and into the narrowing lanes where light flickers unevenly from shuttered windows. Here, the rumors live. And they're thicker than fog. This is the part they don't put in the Golem stories, because after every legend of a protector, there's another story buried beneath, one about how fear doesn't vanish, it evolves, and tonight, it's come back around. A boy runs past you, nearly knocking over a barrel. He glances back over his shoulder, pale, breathless. You see it in his eyes before he says a word. It's happening again, the rabbi mutters. The story spreads faster than fire. A Christian boy, again. Missing. Just like before. You don't need anyone to tell you the rest. Accusations are coming. The kind that arrive with torches, and here's your mainstream historical fact: blood libel accusations against Jews continued for centuries. In Prague alone, documented incidents go back to the 14th century. Each time, the pattern repeated: child vanishes, Jews blamed, violence erupts. And each time, even when the accused were proven innocent, the scars remained. Now for the quirky piece, in some versions of the Golem tale. It's said that after the child was found alive, he told his parents he'd been taken by a man with no mouth. No record of this exists in official archives, of course. But it pops up again and again in folk retellings. The man with no mouth. The idea that the golem didn't just protect, it retrieved. Back in the alley, the rabbi pulls his cloak tighter. They're meeting at the tavern, he says. They think I don't know. But of course he knows. He always knows. This isn't the first time he's walked this path, through rising suspicion, through muttered threats. But now the stakes feel different. He's older. Tireder. The golem is still upstairs, yes, but that's not the part keeping him awake. It's the people outside the ghetto walls. The ones who don't fear consequences anymore. You remember, he says suddenly, that I asked the emperor whether he wanted truth or quiet? You nod. I think they want neither now. Just fire. You turn the corner and see them. A small crowd. Not a mob. Not yet. But close. They stand near the edge of the Jewish quarter, outside a bakery shuttered for the night. There's shouting, but low, controlled. A man gestures angrily. Another bangs a stick against a barrel, and just like that, the century collapses. You've seen this before, even if you haven't lived it. Crowds don't need facts. They need permission, and rumors are permission with shoes on. The rabbi doesn't flinch. He walks forward. Slowly. Silently, and the crowd begins to quiet, because even now, even after all this, there's still something about him. He stands before them, not tall, not imposing, but immovable, and then someone in the back whispers a word. You can't hear it, but you see the faces change. One by one. Eyes widen, they think he's brought it. You glance around, pulse quickening. There's nothing behind you. No footsteps. No strange shape stepping from shadow, but the possibility is there, and that's the genius of it. He hasn't needed to use the golem for years, he just needs them to believe he might. Historians still argue whether the golem was ever seen by anyone outside the Jewish quarter. Some say it walked the rooftops. Others claim it moved like a wind through the alleys. A few dismiss it all as parable. But no one disputes this. No pogrom occurred during the Maharal's tenure in Prague. Coincidence? A master negotiator, or something else watching from the attic? The crowd disperses. Not with panic. With unease, like they've just remembered their shoes are untied. The rabbi turns to you, eyes heavy. This is what kept me awake, he says. Not the golem. Not the clay. Then he points to the retreating backs of the crowd, them. And for a second, you see the real fear. Not in his voice, but in his restraint, because deep down, he wonders, if they come again, not with words, but with flames, will he still only watch, or will he climb the ladder? And uncage what sleeps above. The rabbi doesn't return home that night, not right away. He walks with you instead, deep into the twisting paths of Joseph, where the gas lamps flicker and the houses lean so close they almost whisper to each other. It's quiet here. Suspiciously quiet. As if the quarter itself is holding its breath, listening to what the rest of the city is planning. You pass a shop boarded shut with iron nails. A butcher's stall smeared with what might be lamb's blood, or not. Every surface hums with silent calculation. The rabbi stops in front of a small, half-hidden door. He unlocks it. Steps inside, and gestures for you to follow. You do, ducking under the low beam. Inside is a workshop you didn't know existed. Smaller than the study. Stranger, this is not a room for prayer. This is a room for construction. Bits of parchment hang from the rafters. Tiny scraps of lead. A basket of dried river clay in one corner. And in the center, a workbench, clearly handmade, stained dark by oils and time. He doesn't say a word at first. Just begins uncovering the objects laid out in silence, a small chisel. A spool of thread. A lump of unshaped earth. And an iron stamp bearing the Hebrew letter, Aleph, you swallow. You know the significance, Aleph is the first letter in Emet. Truth. The word carved on the golem's forehead to bring it to life. Remove the Aleph, and you're left with Met, death. The rabbi runs a hand through the dust on the workbench and finally speaks. There was a girl, he says. Not long after Shevach. You stiffen, she didn't speak. Wouldn't. Traumatized, maybe. Or simply private. He picks up the Aleph stamp. Rolls it slowly between his fingers. She saw something. I don't know what. But she drew it for me. He retrieves a tattered piece of parchment from a wooden drawer. On it is a child's sketch. Crude lines. A towering shape with long arms, no eyes, and a flat, expressionless face. She said it stood beside her when the others threw stones. He says. She didn't cry. She just pointed to her neck. He traces his own. It touched her throat. And then they ran. You study the drawing again. There are no mouths on the figures around it. Just excess. Like they'd been silenced. I hadn't made it yet, the rabbi says quietly. Not the final one. A chill curls up your back. So what did she see? He looks at you. And for a moment, you glimpse fear, not of what he's made, but of what might be making itself. Historians still argue, he murmurs, whether the golem was ever real. He steps back toward the workbench, places the Aleph gently next to the clay, but what if they're arguing with the wrong assumption? He turns to you. Eyes sharp now, what if I didn't create it? What if I only awaken it? You sit down slowly on a low stool. He nods, but slower. With more care. With stories. I taught the next one scripture. Parables. Not just obedience, context. You want to laugh, but the weight of this room keeps your mouth shut. He didn't just build a body. He tried to build a conscience, and maybe that's why it still listens. Why it hasn't broken free, yet. He lifts a small book from the shelf. Not a holy text. A journal. Full of sketches, half-formed words, strange diagrams spiraling into each other like musical notation for someone who no longer thinks in sounds. The last page is blank. But at the top, faintly, is written, the next one must choose. You shiver, the rabbi replaces the journal. Covers the clay, and turns away. The workshop feels colder without the candlelight. Like something's watching, but you can't see it yet. Before he opens the door to leave, he pauses. You asked earlier what kept me awake at night, he says. You nod. It's not fear that it will rise again, he whispers. It's knowing that one day, it must. And then he steps into the alley, vanishing like smoke into shadow. You stay in the workshop long after he's gone. The candle sputters once, then steadies, casting flickering shadows across the walls, shadows that don't quite match the shapes you remember. The headpiece, half hidden under cloth, seems a little closer than before. Or maybe the shadows just want you to think that. You consider touching it. You don't, instead, you sit, letting the silence crawl over your shoulders. You realize you're listening again, not for footsteps or breath, but for thoughts. For the quiet hum of something trying to think. Or pretending not to, because you now understand the awful brilliance of the rabbi's creation. It wasn't just a guardian. It was a mirror. A clay response to a world that refused to listen unless spoken to with fear. A golem, yes. But more than that, a question carved into silence, and maybe an answer no one wanted to hear. A knock startles you. 2 short raps on the outer door. Then 3. Then silence. You open it cautiously and find a boy, no older than 10. Barefoot, lips chapped from wind. He looks like he's been running. In his hand, a folded piece of parchment. For the Rav, he says, and before you can reply, he darts off into the fog. You unfold it. One word, written in sharp, urgent Hebrew, Kiddushin. You feel the word before you process it. It thrums in your chest like a warning bell. Kiddushin, the tractate of the Talmud dealing with marriage, betrothal, unions that bind not just two people but whole communities. Why would the rabbi want that, unless you step into the night, following the winding trail through the Jewish quarter to the rabbi's home? But when you arrive, he isn't there. The candle in the study has burned low. A single page lies open on his desk. It reads, "A union is not only between people. It is between what we fear and what we allow to speak for us." You sit and wait. Eventually, you hear the ladder creak above. Slow. Careful. Measured. He's gone back to the attic. Let's pause for a historical tether. The Maharal wasn't just a mystic or a theorist. He was also a master of metaphor. His teachings on Kiddushin are among the most nuanced, using legal discussion of marriage to explore the binding forces of community, divine intention, and mutual obligation, which makes his cryptic note all the more unnerving, because maybe he's not talking about a man and woman, maybe he's talking about the city, and the Golem. About the community that built it. And the obligation that comes with unleashing it. Now for the quirky bit. A fringe legend says the Maharal once placed two clay figures in front of the ark and recited blessings over them as if they were bride and groom. When questioned, he said only, "Even that which cannot speak may carry a covenant." The attic door creaks again. Then silence. You want to go up there. Really, you do, but the rabbi's study feels heavier now. Not oppressive, just full. As if someone else is already there. You wander to the bookcase. It's disorderly in that very precise way of obsessive minds, books arranged by memory rather than system. You scan titles until one catches your eye. Kol Dodi Dofek, the voice of my beloved knocks. You open it. A passage is underlined. If we cannot protect ourselves with speech, the world will give us shape with its violence. You stare at it for a long time. And now something strange begins to tick in your brain. Not fear. Not curiosity, recognition. You remember the rabbi's words, "It wasn't always clay." And you wonder if, somehow, over centuries of prayers, pleas, weeping, silence, something heard. Not a god, not a demon, something older. Rawer, maybe the first golem wasn't made in Prague. Maybe it was made the first time a Jewish mother held her child close and whispered, "I would give anything to keep you safe." Maybe it was made the first time a boy screamed while soldiers kicked in his father's door. Maybe it has always been forming, and maybe, just maybe, it waits for moments like this to finish the job. You close the book. From upstairs, there's a faint hum. Not a voice. Not quite, but almost. You remember what the rabbi said, the next one must choose. What did he mean, choose what? You rise and place the letter with Kiddushin back on the desk. There's a sound from behind the trapdoor now. A breath. Not yours. You look up, and though you can't see it, though the candle has dimmed, and the study is bathed in bronze twilight, you feel it. It's listening again. Not out of anger, but out of obligation. You don't go upstairs. Not tonight. Instead, you wait, below, in the study, where even the candlelight seems too afraid to flicker. The trapdoor above remains closed, a silent lid over whatever breathes in that space beyond knowing. The rabbi doesn't come back. You don't know whether that should worry you. Morning arrives slowly, the sky over Prague turning a color you'd call gold if it weren't so dull and exhausted. Somewhere, bells ring. Bakers begin to shout their prices. The world turns again, as it always does, unaware of how close it might have come to changing forever in the space between two creaking floorboards. You spend the day in silence. Sorting his books, though no one asked you to. They've stopped being just texts now. They're breadcrumbs. Clues. Warnings. Maybe, late in the afternoon, the rabbi returns. He doesn't speak right away. Just enters like someone who's been traveling through memories, not streets. His robes are dusted with what might be brick powder. His hands shake just slightly, he pours tea, you don't speak either. Finally, he sits. Do you know the problem with creating a guardian? He asks quietly. Eventually, people stop asking whether it should be used. They just ask whether it can be. He hands you a cup. You don't drink, he continues. When I was young, I thought it would be simple. A thing to protect us. A barrier, not a blade. He stares into the fire now, though it hasn't been lit in days, but blades do what blades do. He closes his eyes. Even when they love the hand that forged them. You realize something is about to be said, something final, so you ask, is it awake now? He doesn't answer directly, instead, he begins a story. There was a boy. Years ago. He lived just outside the quarter, in a poor family, barely educated. Curious, though. He liked to sneak into the back of our study hall. Not to pray. Just to watch. You imagine him, this boy, mud on his shoes, eyes wide with questions. One day, the rabbi says, he was caught drawing in the margins of a sitter. Little images, animals made of flame, letters dancing in rings. I should have scolded him. But I didn't. He smiles faintly. I asked him why he drew those things. He said, because they're there. I just see them when you speak. He leans back. Sometimes I wonder if he saw something I didn't. You ask what became of the boy, the rabbi shrugs. Gone. Perhaps dead. Perhaps changed. He taps a long, pale finger against his temple, but I remember what he said next. They don't want us to have a protector. They want us to be afraid of needing one. The room is very quiet now. Let's anchor this with a historical thread. The Jewish community of Prague in the late 16th century lived under constant threat. But it was also a golden age of scholarship, printing, and quiet resilience. The Maharal's court became a refuge not just for religious thinkers but for wanderers, those who brought stories from the corners of Europe, including tales of shadow creatures, divine messengers, and beings who watched from rooftops. And here's your quirky bit. One traveler who visited Prague in the early 1600s recorded that he saw a stone-faced man without breath standing on the roof of the synagogue at dawn. He assumed it was a statue. Until it turned its head, back in the study, the rabbi rises and opens a small box you hadn't noticed before. Inside, a piece of parchment, folded many times, soft as fabric. He lays it on the table. Written on it is a single line of Hebrew, small but precise. To erase is not to forget. You ask what it means. He replies, I once removed the aleph. But I never erased the word. You feel it again. That strange pressure in the air. Like the attic is listening through the ceiling, you ask, hesitantly, if it can hear him. He nods. Always. Then he glances upward. But lately, it's been speaking back. Your skin prickles. And what does it say? He smiles grimly, not in words. In dreams. In metaphors. You want to press further, but he cuts you off with a sudden look, not unkind, but final. I need to show you something, he says. Before you decide what you believe. He opens the door to the night. Outside, the wind has picked up. It carries the scent of stone, rain, and faintly. Something that smells like memory. You follow him through the quarter once more, past houses where windows are shuttered not against cold, but fear. Past streets where even the cats move quietly. He leads you to the synagogue, and up the stairs, and then, to the attic. The trapdoor creaks open slowly. There's no dramatic moment. No thunder. No glowing eyes, just darkness, and in the center, barely illuminated by the moon through a high window, a shape, massive, still, clay, cracked in places. Hebrew letters faint along the forehead. A silence so complete it makes your ears ring. It hasn't moved, but it doesn't need to, because it knows. The rabbi says nothing. He doesn't approach. Just stands there beside you, breathing quietly. You don't know how long you stand there, 5 minutes. A lifetime. Eventually, he places a hand on your shoulder. I built it to protect us, he whispers, but now I fear it will remember what we wanted it to forget. The attic groans with age, as if it, too, remembers the night it first held this thing. The golem doesn't move. It stands there, unmoving and enormous, like the husk of a storm. Its body is cracked in places, like fired clay left too long in cold weather. But even still, it radiates something impossible to name. Not life. Not quite. But presence, and presence is sometimes worse. You take a tentative step forward. The rabbi doesn't stop you. His gaze stays locked on the figure, as though he's watching a child sleep after a long illness, relieved, but never truly at ease. You study the face. Or what passes for one. It's not symmetrical. The features are slightly askew. A human might have made it, but only barely. There's something wrong with the proportions, too close together. Too wide apart, like a dream's attempt at a face, and on its forehead, the word emet. Truth. Faded, but legible, you find yourself whispering. It's not breathing. No, the rabbi says softly. Not in the way we do. But it's aware. He nods. More than aware. Less than conscious. It listens. It reacts. But only when it must. You stare up at it, at its stillness, and realize what you're feeling isn't fear. It's sadness. Deep and old. Did it ever speak? The rabbi closes his eyes. Once. But not with a voice. That unnerves you more than you expect. You want to ask what it said, but he continues before you can. It acted. That was enough. A gust of wind rattles the wooden frame. And the golem's shadow shifts slightly across the attic floor. You nearly flinch. But it remains still. The rabbi sits on an old crate and rubs his temples. Do you know how many times I've wanted to destroy it? You shake your head. 17, he says. I've counted. Once after a child was hurt. Twice when I dreamt it walking in daylight. And once when I feared I might need it again. He looks up at you, and for the first time, there's something vulnerable in his eyes, but I never could. Because every time I tried to plan it, every time I brought up the chisel, I felt it watching. Not with eyes. With permission. You frown. Permission for what? To stop me. If it deemed the timing wrong. That sounds insane, of course. But here, under this roof, logic bends. You're starting to believe that belief itself might shape reality. And the golem knows that. Here's a mainstream fact for you. Most traditional golem legends claim that the creature was eventually deactivated, by erasing the aleph from its forehead, turning emet, truth, into met, death. But some versions say the Maharal didn't erase anything. He buried the golem. Others say he left it standing, inert but upright, waiting for a time of need. And now, the quirky detail, in the attic of the Altnuskal synagogue, there really is a locked chamber that no one enters. Some say it's just old storage. Others insist it was sealed by decree centuries ago, because something was placed there that should not be disturbed. Rabbis to this day refuse to open it. Historians still argue whether the story of the golem was meant to be symbolic, a metaphor for Jewish resilience. Or whether it was a cultural coping mechanism, a protective myth whispered in the face of constant danger. But standing here, you begin to wonder, what if it's not about protection from outsiders? But protection from ourselves, because here's the truth the rabbi never wrote down, the golem doesn't protect you from violence, it protects you from what you might become in response to it. The rabbi speaks again. After it was built, people changed. How? They grew quiet, he says. Too quiet. They no longer prayed for strength. They assumed strength was already watching. And strength without prayer is a dangerous thing. You circle the golem slowly, noting the tools scattered at its base, old cloth wrappings, a brush, the iron stamp for aleph, still rusted at the edge. There's a faint groove in the floor, as though it once shifted weight, moved toward the ladder. And stopped. You ask the rabbi, has it moved since? Not physically, he says. But yes. You pause. How? I found footprints once. Wet clay. But the body hadn't shifted. I don't think it walks the way we do. You shudder. What then? He gives you a look that is part warning, part confession. I think it walks in memory. You glance at the golem again. Its posture, its stillness, isn't restful. It's ready, it remembers who made it, the rabbi says. But also why. And you finally understand the most frightening part of all, the golem doesn't obey commands. It obeys intentions. You cannot lie to it. You cannot weaponize it without cost. If you awaken it in anger, it remembers. If you awaken it in fear, it multiplies that fear until even you no longer recognize your reflection in its decisions. The rabbi stands. One day, he says, someone else will find this room. Maybe a child. Maybe a soldier. Maybe someone desperate enough to ask clay for justice. You look at the golem. Imagine that future. And wonder whether the creature will rise again with the same word on its head, or whether next time. The word will already be half erased. You descend from the attic slowly, one step at a time, as if carrying a fragile truth down a ladder. The rabbi follows, his silence not empty but deliberate, like he's allowing the weight of what you've seen to settle into your bones before offering more. The door closes behind you with a low click, and the air of the study feels heavier now, as if something from above has seeped into the walls. Not many have seen it. The rabbi says. And fewer still have walked away understanding why. You glance at him. Do I understand? He pours a glass of water and shrugs. You understand enough to lose sleep tonight. That's a start. There's the sarcasm again, dry and tired. You're grateful for it. It's a reminder that even legends need tea breaks. The rabbi seats himself behind his desk and opens a narrow drawer. From it, he removes an object wrapped in old cloth. He unwraps it gently, like unveiling an old wound. It's a tooth, but not human, too large. Too smooth. And etched with symbols, not carved like decoration, but grown somehow into the surface. You don't touch it. What is it? You ask. He smiles without mirth. A mistake. He slides it toward you. Or a warning. Depends on who you ask. You raise an eyebrow, he leans back. During the early years, before I finalized the form, I experimented with more than just clay. Clay was symbolic, yes, but also limiting. I wondered, what if protection could take other shapes? What if it could hide? He gestures vaguely toward the dark outside the window. There are creatures in the old stories that walk beside us. That we forgot not because they were useless, but because they frightened us. You pick up the cloth, but not the tooth. And this? Was one of those experiments. A different kind of guardian. Too subtle. Too curious. It didn't protect. It watched. He closes the drawer, and it left. You sit with that for a while. The idea that not every protection wants to protect. Some just witness. And remembering can be a kind of judgment. Let's thread in our historical anchor here. Jewish folklore is rich with tales of not just golems, but shedim, demons, iber, spiritual possessions, and dibaks. Some protect, some torment, some simply exist as echoes of communal trauma. The Maharal was steeped in this lore, not just as legend, but as intellectual framework. To him, allegory was never just allegory. Now for the quirky tidbit, there's a fragment of text from a lost responsum allegedly penned by the Maharal. Recovered in a Polish Janiza, in which he refers to those servants made from more than clay and warns of mouths that move only when forgotten. Back in the study, the rabbi opens a different book now. This one is not mystical. It's a census record. He flips it open to a marked page. There's a name here, he says. Eliezer ben Tuvia. A baker's son. You look at the list. The name is crossed out in ink, but you can still read it. He vanished in 1583, the rabbi says. During the first blood libel panic. You nod. You've heard the story. What you don't know, he continues, is that Eliezer came back. Weeks later. No one knows where he'd been. He sips his water, but he never spoke again. You feel it now, something under the floorboards of history, scratching for attention, and then? You ask, the rabbi's voice drops. He began drawing. In ash. On windows. On the backs of doors. Circles, mostly. And one image over and over, he draws it on a scrap of parchment. It's simple, a pair of open hands, palms facing forward, each with a Hebrew letter at the base. You squint. Yod and Mem. He nods. Yam, he says. The sea. You frown. So. He places the parchment beside the tooth. Eliezer believed the golem didn't come from us. He believed it came through us. Like the sea passing through a cracked vessel. It shaped itself according to our fear. Our guilt. Our stories. You look at the drawing again, and now the hands feel less like an invitation and more like a boundary. So we didn't build it, you say slowly. We became a channel for something older. The rabbi nods. Perhaps we named it Golem. But it had names before. And will again. A distant bell rings in the street. It's late now. The kind of late where the air itself leans on the windows, tired of being wind. The rabbi closes the book. Eliezer disappeared again in his 20s. No record of him after that. And the drawings? Still appear sometimes. When the city's nervous. Before riots. On cellar doors. You feel a slow dread trickle down your spine. He picks up the parchment, folds it neatly, and tucks it into his coat. Here's what keeps me awake, he says at last. Not the golem. Not anymore. He meets your gaze, steady and calm. It's that one day, it won't be a choice. And then he rises, extinguishes the candle, and leaves the study in darkness. You sit for a while longer, surrounded by ghosts made of paper and silence. Outside, something soft and heavy steps through the alleyway, so quietly you're not sure it was ever there. You sleep poorly. When you finally drift off, if it can be called sleep, it's a kind of anxious hovering, like your thoughts refuse to land. You dream in fragments. A cracked mouth whispering in Hebrew. A staircase that descends forever into clay. A heartbeat echoing through stone. When you wake, your clothes still smell faintly of the attic. You find the rabbi already awake, seated in the kitchen with tea that has long gone cold. He doesn't greet you. Just gestures toward the door. We need to walk. You don't argue. Outside, Prague stirs to life in its usual hesitant rhythm, bakers arguing over flour prices, children dragging sticks along fences, the heavy clatter of church bells that always seem to ring just a bit too long. But as you move deeper into the Jewish quarter, you notice something is different. Quieter. Not hushed from reverence, but wary. People nod at the rabbi. Quickly. Avoid eye contact with you. Something's happened. You reach the edge of the quarter. There, pinned to the door of the old tavern with a shard of broken glass, is a notice. Another child is missing. The rabbi doesn't touch the paper. Just reads it once and turns away. You follow. We've entered the pattern again, he says flatly. What pattern? He stops beside a dry fountain and points to a crack in the stone rim. Pressure. Accusation. Retaliation. Then repeat. And the golem? You ask. His voice lowers. The golem was built to interrupt that pattern. But? He looks out toward the rooftops, where gulls circle the chimneys, but now I'm not sure whether it broke the cycle, or simply paused it. Let's anchor here in history. The late 16th century was a volatile time for Jews in Prague. Despite relative protection under Emperor Rudolf II, suspicion and slander always lurked just below the surface. Blood libels didn't need evidence, just timing. And every few years, the pattern returned. Missing child, furious crowd, Jewish scapegoat. The cycle was never truly broken, only delayed. Here's the quirky bit. In a forgotten corner of Prague's Jewish museum is a small clay figure, misshapen and eyeless, labeled only the Watcher. There's no official explanation. Some say it was placed in a synagogue window to deter slander. Others claim it was left behind by someone who feared the original protector had grown tired. Back in the street, you and the rabbi continue walking. He leads you behind the synagogue, down an alley choked with ivy and damp brick. At the end is a low door you've never noticed before. He opens it. Inside is a room smaller than the attic. Cooler. Dusty. Rows of shelves line the walls, filled with scrolls, broken quills, and old shoes. It's not a library, he says before you can ask. It's a record of promises. You frown. These, he continues, running his hand along a shelf, are not laws. Not decrees. They're agreements, vows made in fear. Bargains struck to prevent catastrophe. He picks up a scroll tied in black ribbon. This one, he says, was written during a winter riot. The leaders of the ghetto agreed not to retaliate. In exchange, the Christian authorities promised to send no soldiers. And it worked. He places it gently back on the shelf, for 2 years. You understand now. The golem isn't the only tool of survival. Silence is, too. Compromise. Concession. Half-truths negotiated in back rooms. You move to the far end of the room, where a larger parchment hangs in a cracked wooden frame. It's brittle with age. Written in Hebrew and Latin, the rabbi joins you. That one, he says, is the original vow. The golem shall not walk unless called upon unanimously. You blink. Unanimously? By who? He answers without hesitation. By the leaders of the community. In writing. Signed with their blood. He touches the frame, but it's never been done. Not once. You let that sink in, because now you understand why the golem hasn't moved since the rabbi's youth. It's not just restraint. It's red tape. Intentional, sacred bureaucracy. A mystical safety net, but what if the people lose faith in the process? You ask. What if someone acts alone? The rabbi's voice goes quiet, then it will respond to the one who needs it most. He looks directly at you, and that person may not be the wisest. You stand in silence. The room smells like dust, ink, and something older, something like waiting. You feel it again, that low, pulsing awareness. Not from the golem. From the air around it. From the community that birthed it. The collective need that shapes legends into muscle. The rabbi leans against the doorframe. History isn't written by the victors, he says. You raise an eyebrow. It's written by the survivors. And the golem, whether real or myth, was never built to win, it was built to survive. The rabbi gives you one last glance, which means sometimes it must stay asleep. Later that night, you return to the study alone. The rabbi has retired upstairs, though after everything you've heard, sleep feels like the wrong word for what he does up there. More like withdrawal. Like a man quietly reviewing a lifetime of decisions in the dark. One cracked prayer at a time, you light a candle and sit in his chair. The leather creaks beneath you. The desk is cluttered with papers, but your eye falls on a thin ledger bound in reddish twine. Its spine is soft with use. The cover reads, Intentions, in order. You open it. Inside, rows and rows of names, some crossed out, some underlined. Not all are written in the same hand. Some you recognize. Others are labeled only with cryptic descriptors, the widow from Brody, the tall one who lied, she who waits. But beside each name is a line of Hebrew. Short. Specific. Sometimes cryptic. You run your fingers down the page and realize these aren't accusations. They're requests. Please. Invocations of fear. Wishes whispered into a world where hope is sometimes the only shield, and you begin to understand what this book is. It's not a list of prayers, it's a list of reasons. You close the ledger and look around the study. The candlelight warps the edges of the room, makes the scrolls on the walls seem to tremble. The attic trapdoor above is closed. For now, you think about that phrase again, the next one must choose. And for the first time, it occurs to you, maybe the rabbi doesn't mean the next golem, maybe he means the next person to call upon it. The rabbi built it, fed it scripture, gave it limits. But those limits are fragile. Clay cracks. Rules bend. Especially under pressure, and something is building. You feel it in the alleyways. In the way people avert their eyes. In the rhythm of the bells, somehow slower than yesterday, you open the window and breathe in the cold Prague air. The city sprawls before you, beautiful, jagged, untrustworthy. It has never known how to live with its ghosts. Only how to rearrange them. Let's pause for a historical thread. There's a peculiar tension in Ashkenazi Jewish memory, between passivity and agency, between survival through silence and survival through resistance. Stories like the golems exist in that murky space. They aren't just about power. They're about who gets to decide when power is allowed to act. And here's the quirky detail: in one obscure folktale from Moravia, a rabbi constructs a golem so perfect that it begins to question its own purpose. It stops obeying orders and instead asks, why do I protect people who do not protect each other? The rabbi's solution is to blind it, an act that causes it to scream once and vanish into mist. That tale was only ever recorded orally, no surviving manuscript exists. You blow out the candle. The room plunges into shadows, soft and long. The only light now comes from the moon slanting through the window, washing the desk in silver, and then, a knock, not the door. Not the attic. The window. You turn, nothing. Just the outline of a tree branch in the wind, but your heart hammers anyway. You walk to the window and peer down. The street is empty, then you see it, at the base of the rabbi's door, something small and dark has been left behind. You hurry down and retrieve it, a folded paper, pinned shut with an iron tack. You open it carefully. Inside, a single word in ash-gray ink, smudged as if by a trembling hand, rise. No signature. No explanation. You glance up at the attic window. Still dark. Still silent, but the shadows in the study seem restless. You bring the paper upstairs and place it on the rabbi's desk. When he emerges an hour later, robe wrinkled, eyes bleary but alert, you say nothing. You simply point to the word. He stares at it a long time, then he sits down, rubs his hands together slowly, and says, "It's begun again." You don't ask what. You know, the pattern. The tension. The hunger for justice. Or vengeance. Or something in between. You ask the only question that matters now: will you wake it? He doesn't answer. Instead, he turns to the ledger of intentions, in order, flips it to a blank page, and writes something you can't quite see. When he finishes, he looks up at you, not stern, not fearful, but calm. It doesn't wake because someone says so, he says softly. It wakes when someone means it. And that's when it hits you. Maybe the golem doesn't need a spell, or a command, or a ritual. Maybe it just needs a reason, and maybe someone out there, tonight, already gave it one. The city doesn't sleep that night. Oh, it tries. Windows are shuttered. Lanterns flicker behind thick curtains. But beneath it all, beneath the clatter of hooves and the last slosh of beer from tavern mugs, Prague hums. An undercurrent. As if something old is stretching beneath the streets, curling through pipes and cracks, running its invisible fingers across stone. You feel it before you hear it, tension. Not the obvious kind, but the kind that settles behind your ribs like cold breath. You lie awake, listening. The rabbi hasn't gone to bed. He paces the study quietly, muttering under his breath. He's not praying. He's negotiating. By morning, word spreads. There's been another disappearance, this time, not a child, a city official, a known agitator. One who, just days ago, was shouting in the market about filthy hands defiling Christian bread. The rabbi doesn't flinch when he hears. He just pours tea and hands you a piece of paper. On it, One name, Moshe Alchel. You recognize it. The carpenter's son. The boy who showed you the dent in the synagogue wall. The one who asked you, half-jokingly, if the golem still dreamed. He left this under my door, the rabbi says. You turn the paper over, on the back. Another word, forgive. 2 notes. 2 opposing commands. Rise. Forgive, you ask, which one will it listen to? The rabbi gives you a look that is neither hopeful nor grim. That's the problem. It listens to both. Let's ground ourselves in a historical footnote. In 1592, a document surfaced claiming that a small group of elders, unrecorded anywhere else, had met in secret during a moment of community crisis. The paper mentions a vote, a disagreement, and a decision to bind the clay one not with silence, but with contradiction. Some scholars believe this was the origin of the rule requiring unanimous consent to awaken the golem, because contradiction is its own kind of spell. And here's your quirky morsel: a forgotten page from a diary, possibly belonging to the Maharal's granddaughter, tells of finding 2 small dolls on her pillow. One made of ash, the other of salt. Each had a single Hebrew letter carved into its chest. She asked her grandfather which was more powerful. He replied, the one that waits. You spend the day waiting, watching from the window as whispers drift between rooftops. People are nervous. Not just about the disappearances, but about what might come next. About whether, this time, something ancient has truly shifted. The rabbi doesn't speak much. He reads, occasionally nods to himself, then scratches something in the ledger. Near evening, he finally breaks the silence. There's one more place you need to see. You follow him through the dusk. He doesn't take the usual roads. Instead, he leads you through alleys too narrow for carts, under arches that seem to bend lower than physics allows. The city seems more ancient in this light. Less Europe, more dream. Eventually, you arrive at a small cellar door half buried in ivy. No keyhole. Just a handprint carved into the stone. He presses his palm to it. The door creaks open. Inside, darkness, and beyond it, stairs. You descend into what feels like the earth's slow exhale. It isn't a catacomb. Nor a vault. It's older than either. Stone walls, rough-hewn. Shelves lined with sealed jars. Some hold wax scrolls. Others contain darker things, fragments, perhaps. Teeth. Hair. Clay, in the center, a circle etched into the floor. You don't recognize the pattern. Neither star nor pentagram. But something balanced. Weighted. This, the rabbi whispers, is the room of return. You glance around. Return of what? Not what, he says. When? He kneels by the circle and places a single parchment in its center. It reads, we ask not for wrath, but for reckoning. You kneel beside him, he says, this is where the first word was spoken. The one that gave it motion. Emet? He shakes his head, earlier. He presses his hand flat against the circle. The word was listen. You feel it then, not the golem, but something deeper, the echo of its first thought. It's like touching the memory of thunder. You hear nothing, but your bones remember sound. Your heart slows, then races. The rabbi doesn't move, it's always listening, he says. Even when it sleeps. Especially when we speak without meaning to be heard. You think of the boy. Moshe. The notes, has someone already asked it to rise? The rabbi looks at you, more than one. He stands, it hasn't moved yet. But if it does, it won't wait for permission. You ascend from the cellar and feel the cold settle behind your ears. Back in the street, the bells ring again. Offbeat. Uneven, you swear the shadows are longer than they should be, and then, a whisper on the wind, not in words, but in feeling, like a door in your memory creaking open, the kind of door you don't remember closing. You wake in the middle of the night, not from a sound, but from the absence of it. The city has gone still. No clatter of hooves, no creaking beams, no murmured lullabies behind the neighbor's shutters. Just an unholy silence that feels watched. You lie there for a moment, unmoving. Not because you're afraid, but because something inside you whispers, don't interrupt. There's motion above, a soft scrape. The shift of heavy weight against wood. You sit up, the attic, the golem, you're halfway up the stairs when you hear it, a dull creak, the moan of joists under impossible weight. Not thunderous. Just enough to say, I remember how to move. When you reach the attic door, you pause. Behind it, the air is thick, pressurized. The kind of atmosphere you associate with the moment before a scream. You push the door open, it's standing in the same spot, but the dust around its feet is disturbed. The rabbi is already there. He's not startled to see you. He just motions for silence. You obey. The golem is not looking at you. It doesn't look at all. But its posture is different, head tilted slightly, chest leaning forward. Hands no longer at its sides, but hanging loose and ready. You glance at the rabbi. His eyes don't leave the creature. It's not awake, he whispers. But it's listening. You ask, to what? He swallows, arguments. He walks slowly to the window, opens it wide. The night air pours in, cold, sharp, and full of stories. Something happened, he says. Another child is missing. But this time, the boy was found. That should be good news. But the tone in his voice tells you otherwise. He wasn't hurt, the rabbi says. Just frightened. He said he was carried by the stone man. Left in the courtyard of the synagogue. Unharmed. You stare at him, but the golem hasn't moved. He nods. Not from here. Let's weave in a historical moment here. In 1600, following a series of nighttime attacks on the Jewish quarter, a rumor circulated that the golem had been seen walking along the Moldau River, glowing faintly in the mist. No physical evidence was found, just footprints in the silt too large for any man. Historians still argue whether these tales were self-soothing myth. Or a community's encoded message, we are not defenseless. Now for the quirky thread. A Christian alchemist named Nikolaus Gruber wrote in his journal that, during a midnight walk, he saw a tall, clay-skinned figure bowing at the cemetery gate. He described it as reverent. As if it mourned something long buried, perhaps even itself. Back in the attic, the rabbi says, I think someone summoned it. Without permission. He nods. Without knowing how. But knowing why. You feel it in your chest, like a page has turned in a book you were too afraid to finish, but that's not possible, you say. It needs the command. The blood seal. No, the rabbi replies. It needs belief. Desperation. A clarity of purpose strong enough to echo backward. You realize what he's saying. Someone didn't perform a ritual, someone made a wish, and meant it. Below, a knock at the study door. The rabbi doesn't move. He just says, they've come. You descend and open it. 3 men stand in the courtyard, eyes low, hats in hand. You know them, community leaders, scribes, and one who owns a linen shop. All of them shaking. The tallest speaks, we didn't call it. But it moved. The rabbi steps forward, barefoot on the stone floor. He asks, what did it do? The linen seller clears his throat. It returned a missing child. No words. Just held out its hand, waited until the boy took it. Then vanished. The rabbi looks down at his hands. It's choosing its own moments now. One of the scribes says, what does that mean? The rabbi meets his eyes. It means it's no longer ours. Not fully. You feel it, too. Something ancient shifting just slightly off axis. You ask, has this happened before? He nods, twice. And the last time? He doesn't answer. Instead, he turns back to the stairs. You follow him. Not because he calls you, but because you feel called. In the attic, the golem stands motionless again, but this time, you notice something new. At its feet, footprints. Bare. Small, a child's, they lead toward the trapdoor. As if someone, something, walked the boy down safely. You shiver. The rabbi kneels beside the clay figure, and then you see what he sees. The word on its forehead, Emet, is slightly smudged. Not erased, just softer, like a message halfway between sleep and awakening. The rabbi doesn't wipe it. Doesn't repair it. Instead, he whispers, "What are you becoming?" Not to you, to it. You wait for an answer, but the attic remains silent, and that silence is no longer reassuring, it's listening. Dawn filters into Prague like an apology, soft, pale, too late to undo the unease that the night has sown into the streets. You stand in the rabbi's kitchen, holding a cup of tea that's gone cold in your hand. Across from you, he's reading a page. Not a prayer, not a spell, just a letter, creased and stained. "It's from Moshe," he says at last. You move closer. The handwriting is rushed but legible. Words spiraling like they were written in motion, on the run, or perhaps in hiding. The message is short: "I didn't mean to wake it. I just asked for help. But I think it heard me anyway. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what it's becoming." The rabbi folds the letter carefully. He's not wrong, he says. The golem used to need command. Now it just needs permission, and even that's loosening. You don't say it out loud, but it's there in the space between your words. Who gave it permission this time? And then the question that follows, heavier: what happens when no one needs to give it permission at all? You step outside for air. The streets are quiet again, but not restful. People walk faster, speak in hushed tones. A little girl clutches her mother's skirts tighter than usual. A dog refuses to pass the old synagogue steps. The city is bracing for something. The rabbi joins you outside. "I've seen this mood before," he says. "Before pogroms. Before the rumors take root and bloom like mold." He pulls a worn pouch from his coat and opens it. Inside are several small parchment slips, tightly rolled. "What are those?" you ask. He passes one to you. "It's delicate, almost crumbling at the edges. They're intentions," he says. "Written by hand. Meant for the golem, but unfinished. People who were too afraid to follow through. Or maybe wise enough not to. You read the one in your hand, 'Protect my son.' But not at the cost of another's." That line sticks in your throat. It's a prayer with a conscience. Rare, he replaces the scroll and tucks the pouch back into his coat. "They don't teach you this," he murmurs, "but the most dangerous prayers are the ones you almost mean." Let's stop here to ground ourselves in history. There's a record of the Maharal students compiling what they called Kavanot Shel Hagana, intentions for protection. These weren't spells. They were emotional distillations. Some scholars believe this practice influenced later Hasidic thought, that emotion and sincerity, more than ritual, could shape divine outcomes. And for today's quirky twist, one of these scrolls, preserved in a Prague archive, contains a full sentence written entirely backward. When translated, it reads, "Do not wake the one who dreams of mirrors." Scholars have argued for decades whether this was a warning or a metaphor, or both. Back in the street, a bell begins to ring. Not a church bell. A handbell. You both turn toward the source. A boy is running down the road, barefoot, eyes wide. He skids to a stop in front of the rabbi, panting. "It's moving," he gasps. "The statue. I saw it, near the river." The rabbi doesn't ask which statue. You run. The streets blur past, cobbled stones turning slick underfoot as you near the Moldau. There, by the water's edge, where fog clings low and the buildings huddle like uncertain witnesses, you see it, a shape, huge, still. The golem stands at the edge of the river, not on a rampage, not in pursuit, but waiting. Its head is tilted slightly down, as though listening to the current. You feel people gathering behind you. No one speaks. Not out of reverence, but uncertainty. What is it doing? Someone whispers, The rabbi doesn't answer, because no one knows. It doesn't move. Doesn't strike. Just stands there, half in shadow, half in sunrise, like an unanswered question etched in clay. You take a slow step forward, drawn by something beyond understanding. Its presence is enormous. But not malevolent. It doesn't feel like a beast, it feels like a mirror, and that, perhaps, is more terrifying, because what if it doesn't protect us? What if it only reflects us? You look into its featureless face and wonder, what does it see? Does it see fear, justice, or something in between, something even it cannot name? The rabbi steps beside you, his voice low. It used to be a tool. You nod, now. You ask, he exhales slowly, now it might be a witness. And suddenly you understand what Moshe meant. The golem is no longer a weapon, it's a reckoning, one made of everything left unsaid, of silences that fermented into power. You remember the footprints in the attic. The child's handprints in the dust. The half-smudged word, emet. The truth isn't erased, it's evolving, and so is the thing that carries it. The golem doesn't move again that day, it simply stands by the river, a silent monument to uncertainty. People drift near it in cautious half-circles, never too close, never too far. Some light candles. Others whisper prayers. A few dare to throw questions into the silence, as if it might answer, are you here to help? Have we done enough? Are we next? The rabbi says nothing, he watches the golem with arms folded, expression unreadable. You notice how his lips twitch slightly now and then, like he's reciting something to himself. A verse? A spell? Or just the names of everyone he's ever failed to protect. You sit with him on a worn bench overlooking the Moldau. The water flows lazily, indifferent to the weight of legend standing on its bank. What is it waiting for? You finally ask. He shrugs, maybe nothing. Maybe everything. You both watch as dusk approaches again. The golem hasn't shifted an inch, and yet the sense of pressure grows. Like the longer it stands still, the more it draws meaning from stillness. The rabbi leans closer. Do you know the story of the mirror golem? He asks quietly. You shake your head. It's not from Prague. Not officially. It comes from a town no longer marked on maps. Supposedly, a golem was made there not to protect, but to observe. Its body was glass, and whoever stood before it would see not their face, but the thing they feared most becoming. You pause. What happened to it? The rabbi gives a dry smile. It shattered. The moment someone tried to love it. Let's slide in our historical anchor. Among the many lesser-known mystical teachings in Jewish folklore is the idea of the golem of reflection, a being whose role wasn't to serve, but to remind. Some rabbinic commentaries suggest such a figure might act as divine conscience, showing not enemies, but the self, in full. Historians still argue whether this was ever actually practiced, or if it was a metaphor for inner spiritual reckoning disguised in clay. And here's our fringe fact. A 17th-century sketchbook discovered in a Krakow cellar contains a drawing of a humanoid figure labeled simply, the mirror. Beneath it, a caption in Aramaic that reads, Woe to the righteous who forget to look inside before raising their voice outside. Back at the riverbank, the crowd has grown, arguments begin to murmur through the gathering, nothing violent, not yet. But the words are familiar, he should send it away. It doesn't belong here anymore. What if the Christians see it? What if they blame us again? And then one voice, sharp and urgent, it needs to act, or leave. You turn to see who said it. It's a young man. Not from the quarter. His coat is too clean, too new. A pamphlet peeks from his pocket, the kind printed fast, full of bold rhetoric and few facts. He's angry. Not at the golem. At the fear it represents. At the way silence has returned to the quarter with more weight than ever. The rabbi steps forward, calm as ever. This isn't a sword to be sheathed or swung at whim, he says. The man snaps, then what is it? And the rabbi's answer floats out quiet and devastating, it's us, distilled. That's what makes it dangerous. The golem turns slightly then, barely perceptible, but enough. Its head tilts toward the man. The crowd gasps. but nothing else happens. Still, it's enough to scatter them. A rush of fearful footsteps and muttering. In seconds, the bank is empty, only you, the rabbi, and the clay sentinel remain. You breathe slowly. Try to piece it together. Why him? You whisper. Why react to that man? The rabbi watches the golem closely, because rage is contagious. And it doesn't care which side you're on. You think back, on the golem's creation, its rumored rampages, its long dormancy. Maybe it wasn't built just to strike enemies. Maybe it was built to recognize how easily we become our own. As the sun sinks lower, the golem lifts one foot, just one, and places it down in the soft mud. No destruction, no roar. Just a presence, reaffirmed, a message, not a movement. The rabbi exhales shakily. It's not here to protect us, he says. You nod slowly. It's here to remind us. And that realization makes you colder than anything it could have crushed, because you finally understand, the golem is not asking, what should I do? It's asking, what have you done? The golem leaves that night. You don't see it go, but you feel the absence, like someone removing a weight from your chest that you'd gotten used to carrying. The space by the river is empty come morning, the footprints gone as if washed away by the fog itself. You and the rabbi return at dawn to see for yourselves. Nothing remains, not a dent in the earth. Not a single scuff of clay. Only the ripple of the Moldau and a quiet that doesn't feel restful. Just paused, he chose to leave. You ask, the rabbi stares at the water a long time before replying, no. We chose not to follow. You frown. That sounds like surrender. He shrugs. It might be. But sometimes, restraint is the only way to survive your own creations. He says it like someone who's tried the opposite. You walk together through the quarter. It's changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. Doors are locked earlier. Conversation quiets when you pass. The legend has bled out of the attic and into the alleyways, staining everything with uneasy memory, and still, no word from Moshe. He hasn't returned. Not to his father's shop. Not to the synagogue. Not to the rabbi's porch in the dead of night. Instead, you find something else, slipped through the slats of the rabbi's door that morning, a small slip of parchment. No name. No address, just 5 Hebrew words written in rough, childlike script. I tried to forgive first. You read it aloud. The rabbi takes it from you gently, folds it without a word, and places it in the pouch with the others. He doesn't have to explain. You know now, someone did wake it. But not out of vengeance. Out of fear, yes, but also hope. And the golem responded not with violence, but with, a lesson. Let's cement the history here, in the few known accounts of the golem's final years under the Maharal. There's a quiet pattern. Not destruction. Not triumph. Just presence. It was seen. Then hidden. Then spoken of in reverent tones. Historians still debate whether it ever truly died or was merely set aside, the way one might put away a loaded pistol after realizing no one here is ready to aim it wisely, and the quirky historical footnote for today. In 1936, an elderly man from Prague claimed to a visiting folklorist that he had once touched the forehead of the walking clay man as a boy, and that he had felt not coldness, but heat. As though it had been standing in the sun, he said. Or closer still, near a soul on fire. The rabbi takes you to the attic one final time. The space feels smaller now, not because of size, but because of memory. The golem's resting place, once heavy with spiritual weight, is just empty floorboards and dust. A smudge of soot remains in the corner. You brush your fingers over it. Not enough to rebuild. Just enough to remember, what happens now? You ask, he looks out the window. We return to choosing. That seems too vague, too abstract. You want a clearer answer. But you understand what he means. Without the golem, the decisions return to human hands. Risky. Beautiful. Fragile, The kind of decisions that led someone like Moshe to summon a myth, not for war, but for help, and now the myth has gone walking again. Not lost, just, out there, waiting for its next reason, the rabbi speaks quietly. We don't build protectors like that to fight our enemies. You turn to him, we build them to hold the parts of ourselves we're too afraid to face. You ask him if he regrets making it, he doesn't answer right away, then, no. But I regret that it was needed. You understand, the golem was never about might. It was about warning. About drawing a line in the dust that says, this far, no further. And maybe, just maybe, it was also about faith, not faith in miracles, but in the idea that something shaped from fear might still choose mercy. As you leave the attic, the rabbi closes the door behind you. Not with finality. Just with a soft click, as if tucking something to sleep again. Downstairs, he opens the ledger, the one labeled intentions, in order. And he writes one last line. You don't see what it says, but he doesn't seal it. He leaves it open, a reminder, because even legends get lonely sometimes, and they, too, watch the door. The weeks pass like breath over glass, foggy, fragile, easily forgotten. The golem is gone, but not erased. Not really. It lingers in conversation, in dreams, in the way people now glance twice at statues and shadows alike. The rabbi rarely speaks of it anymore. But you can tell when he's thinking about it. His tea cools untouched. His quill taps absent-mindedly against the desk. His prayers run longer, softer, as if asking questions no longer meant for God, but for something made of clay and silence. Then, one morning, a letter arrives. Sealed in plain wax. No name. You open it. Inside, just a few lines. He carried me farther than I asked. He didn't break anything. He waited until I stopped crying. It's signed, simply, M. Moshe. You read it aloud to the rabbi. He listens without blinking, then folds the paper and slips it behind a row of psalms on the shelf. No comment. No smile. Just a pause that feels like gratitude. I think he understood. You say, the rabbi nods. No one ever builds a golem for power. He says. They build it for control. And the tragedy is always the same. Eventually, it learns to decide for itself. You realize something. This story was never about obedience. It was about choice. The golem was always meant to reflect the community's conscience, and that conscience, sometimes, is a flickering thing. Let's ground this moment in the historical dust. The Maharal's writings never explicitly mention the golem. Scholars continue to debate whether the legend grew later, a posthumous myth grafted onto a respected scholar to give shape to communal hope. But the need for the golem? That part was real. So were the dangers. So was the fear, and now, your quirky footnote, in a hidden corner of the Altnuskul's attic, a place almost no one is allowed to enter, there's a brick with a single Hebrew letter carved into it, Aleph. The start of Emet. Some say it's all that remains. Others say it's a warning, don't finish the word unless you're ready to start the story again. Prague moves on, the baker still argues with his flour supplier. The butcher's son still feeds pigeons near the cemetery gates. The city doesn't know it stood on the edge of something unspeakable. Or maybe it does, and just chooses silence, as people so often do when faced with something too large to hold. One day, the rabbi hands you a small scroll. Not old. Fresh parchment. Ink still damp. Take this to the archive, he says. You do. Inside the archive, the clerk receives it with a knowing glance. We've had more of these lately. She murmurs. Not all signed. Not all finished. You ask her what they are. Intentions, she says. Seeds. Some take root. Others are warnings. You return to the rabbi. He's lighting a candle in the synagogue. The light dances on his face, casting deep shadows. He looks older, somehow, but more peaceful. You think it'll come back? You ask. He doesn't look up. I think it never really left. You wait. Then, what would it take to wake it again? His answer is almost too soft to hear: honesty. Pain. A moment of unbearable clarity. You both fall into silence, then he adds, or a lie so heavy, it sinks through the soul and hits the earth with enough force to wake something sleeping beneath it. You shiver, but not from cold, because you know, he's not talking about clay anymore, he's talking about people, and what they choose to forget. The rabbi steps down from the bima and says, "You've seen enough." You ask, "What now?" He hands you a key, not to the attic, to the archive. Someone has to remember where the instructions are buried, he says. But more importantly, why they were ever written. You leave him there, alone with the flickering candle. As you step into the street, the air smells faintly of winter, and for a moment, just before the wind shifts, you swear you hear it again, not footsteps, not breath, but a stillness that leans forward. Listening, always listening, winter falls heavy over Prague, snow settles like whispered prayers on rooftops, softening the hard lines of stone and memory alike. The city glows in cold silence, and with it returns the illusion of peace, of time moving forward without remembering what it has passed through. You walk the narrow streets now as someone changed. Not a witness, not quite a guardian. Something in between. The kind of person who keeps stories not in books, but in glances, in gestures, in careful decisions not to speak unless absolutely necessary. The rabbi moves slower these days. He smiles more, but speaks less. Not out of fatigue, but from the weight of knowing too much and the wisdom of saying just enough. In the early hours of one morning, he calls you into the study. The room is lit by a single oil lamp, the flame flickering like it too remembers the golem's gaze. On the desk before him lies a fresh page, not the ledger, not scripture, a letter, to whoever finds this. It begins, he hands it to you. "I'm tired," he says, voice even. And tired men shouldn't carry sleeping giants in their minds. You don't try to argue, instead, you read the letter. It isn't a guide to building the golem. It's a warning about building the need for one. It speaks of fear, and power, and what happens when people expect protection without offering justice in return. It ends with a single instruction: when you ask it to rise again, ask also, what have you done to prevent needing it? You fold the letter, it belongs in the archive. Later, you walk there alone, it's quiet, dust motes floating like ghosts in the lamplight. The clerk nods as you pass her and vanish into the deeper shelves, where history sleeps upright in parchment boxes and silk-wrapped bundles. You place the letter beside the others. Not in the center. Not in gold ink. Just present. One more voice in the chorus, one more reminder for those who think clay has no memory. Let's pause here for our final historical glint. In 1893, a storm unearthed a cracked slab near the old Jewish cemetery. It bore no name, just 3 carved letters. Rain had blurred the last one. Some said it was coincidence. Others believed it meant the golem had once again faded, not from destruction, but from disappointment. And your final quirky thread? A child visiting from abroad once asked his grandmother, "Why do they say the golem lives in the attic?" She replied, "Because it's the only room in Prague where people still speak their fears aloud." Outside, snow begins to fall again. Soft. Steady, you pause beneath a flickering street lamp and look toward the Altnusko. Its spire cuts into the sky like a question. The attic window is dark, but you know better now. Darkness doesn't mean absence, it means rest. Maybe that's all legends are, resting truths, waiting to be remembered. You walk home slowly, each footstep pressing gently into the fresh snow, leaving behind temporary prints, like the golem once did. You wonder if someone will follow yours, wondering what story they're stepping into. At your door, you pause, look back at the synagogue. Then up at the sky, and whisper the word under your breath, not loud enough to wake anything, just loud enough to remember, Emet. Truth, not to command, just to carry. And now, dear listener, your journey with the rabbi, and the shadow he left behind, comes to a close. The golem sleeps again, somewhere in the folds of story and stone, and so should you. Let your breath slow now, picture the streets of Prague beneath a soft snowfall. Quiet, ancient, eternal, imagine the flicker of candlelight on a wooden desk. The scent of old parchment and ink. The faint creak of floorboards in an attic filled not with monsters, but with memories. You are safe here, the footsteps that once echoed through your thoughts are gone now. Replaced by stillness, not of emptiness, but of peace earned through patience. Remember, the golem was never about brute strength, it was about responsibility, a reflection, a question we ask ourselves in the mirror when no one else is looking. So breathe, and let go of today's weights. The regrets, the questions, the what-ifs, let the cold stone of Prague fade behind you, softened by snow and sleep. You are not being watched now, you are being held. By quiet, by history, by the soft closing of a book whose ending is not final, just paused, until someone needs to turn the page again. So close your eyes, let the shadows wrap around you like a warm, silent cloak. The golem will not rise tonight. Tonight, we rest.